Good Sunday morning. Welcome to Inside Tennessee, along with my colleague John North. I'm John Becker, your moderators today, where we're going to talk about what's next in the legislative session in 2025. And with us this morning is Dr. and Senator Richard Briggs. He represents Knox County and some 200,000 people. That's true for each of the 33 senators in Tennessee. Always good to see you.
Good to be here.
He's also a Republican. We'll make that known. Eddie Smith is a fellow Republican and used to represent Knoxville as a state lawmaker. Nice to have you with us.
Good morning, John.
Don Bosch is way away from government.
Way, but always not too far. So
he is a Democrat and runs his own law firm. Great to see you, Don.
Good to be here.
Dr. Briggs, the special session wrapped up last week, but we need to revisit some of the issues you dealt with, including vouchers. This was a vote you said no to. You did not go along with Republican Governor Bill Lee. Why?
You know, there's really several reasons, and I'll get right to the point on those. They were wanting to call those opportunity scholarships, but you have to remember that once a child goes from the public schools into the private school, he's giving up the opportunity for some of these vocational trades that we talk about a lot. We talk about career technical education. We don't have those in the private schools. The other thing is that the military, which is very, very important to me, has given me a lot of opportunities. They can be barred from going into private schools by law. They can come in and give young graduates what some of the military opportunities are. And then also, if we look at the trial that we have already had in Tennessee in Shelby and Davidson County, when we do an apples to apples comparison with the test results of the same test with the children that went from the public schools to the private schools and compare them to the public school students, I'll be kind and call the results abysmal. 9 out of 10 children that went to the private schools that had previously been in public schools did not meet the state standard in 2022.
One other thing you mentioned off camera was the concern about the fiscal note and the fact that the lawmakers reviewing this, the group reviewing this, said 2 out of every 3 students who will receive these scholarships is already in private school.
Well, that's correct. I mean, that wasn't concealed or anything else. And we know from the other states that have had this for quite a while, the new states, such as Arkansas and Arizona, usually somewhere between 80 and 90% of the children that take the scholarships or take the vouchers have never been in a private school.
It's just never a public school.
I mean, never in a public school.
Right.
They've done their entire academic career has been in private schools.
Just one more follow-up on that, Dr. Briggs. You mentioned Arizona, where, if you read the headlines correctly, people are like, we had no idea we were taking on sort of this massive black hole of funding. Is there anything that could stop Tennessee from sort of absorbing that? I mean, I think there are like 20,000 supposed slots or scholarships that this would be available for, or could Tennessee sort of slide that direction like places like Arizona?
You know, you got to be, I am a no, but you got to be very fair about what the bill did. I think in Tennessee we're very fiscally responsible, and we did limit it to 20,000 this year, and I mean, I think the intention is to eventually expand it. However, we have safeguards in there that should keep us from ever getting into this black deficit hole that some of the other states have done. I do have a lot of confidence that we'll try to keep a lid on this thing if it started to get completely out of hand.
But you're still a no vote.
Well, I'm still a no vote. Let me qualify. Sure. I'm a no vote until you can show me that there's superior results.
And one last question on that. What do you think turned the views of some of your colleagues who voted against this before but voted for it this time?
To be perfectly frank, there was a lot of pressure from a lot of different sides. Of course, Governor Lee, and I met with him 3 times privately. There's been a lot of innuendo and rumors. He never said or offered anything inappropriate. He was very ethical about the way that we talked about it. He was very gracious with me, but there was a lot of pressure for people to vote on this. Also, there was pressure from some sides of the conservative Republican wing, but there were also Tennessee Stands was opposed to this, and they're arguably one of the most conservative parts of our Republican Party in Middle Tennessee.
Very quick, you talk about pressure. Was there any pressure as a result of the fact that this kind of Frankenstein special session where we had hurricane relief, we had vouchers, and then the third item, immigration. Was there any pressure put on, say, Upper East Tennessee to support vouchers who didn't want vouchers but needed hurricane relief?
I don't think there was too much. I know there were some mayors at the last minute talk to their representatives. I would like you to vote for it. Some of this was, off the record. I'd like you to vote for it because we're afraid we won't get what we need.
Right.
But I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't think that was the whole issue.
And I think that pans out when you look at the House side, that they actually took those issues up before they got to the vouchers, and those were already settled and done. So there was actually no pressure on the House side because that had already been passed and
it was a
kicked to the
bad
Senate.
political optic, at least in my opinion. To do those
Maybe
three
it was, but in reality, I don't think that affected the votes.
Fair enough. We've got to take a quick break on Inside Tennessee. We're going to be back with more of our conversation with Dr. Briggs. His priorities this session. We'll be back right after this. Back on Inside Tennessee, our guest this morning, Dr. and Senator Richard Briggs. Eddie, let's lead off with you.
So, we could do a whole segment on the special session, but that's now in the past. We've now got the regular session, which I know the House met this past week. The Senate comes back next week. So let's look ahead. The State of the State is Monday night, tomorrow night, actually. So what do you see both for your priorities, and what do you think the governor's going to be talking about?
Well, we'll have to wait until we see what the governor's talking about. I'll have to say that a lot of the air has been sucked out of the room for looking ahead because of the special session. So we'll wait and see what the governor has to say. But as far as my priorities, I have a couple, and some of them are a result of the special session. In the immigration bill, there was a section that said that if a city councilman or a county commissioner voted a certain way regarding sanctuary cities, that was a felony. They could go to prison for 1 to 6 years, and they would be removed from office.
Might even be unconstitutional.
That may very well be unconstitutional. I'm going to have a bill anyway that gives immunity to those local legislative bodies,
so
just like we do for
render
civil.
it null and void.
It would basically void that part. But personally, I think that would be. I'll leave it up to the lawyer. But I think it's unconstitutional.
As do I. And do you think your Republican colleagues, will go along and support that bill?
I think there could very well be enough to pass the bill. We'll have to wait and see.
Have you got a House sponsor as well?
Yes.
Who is it?
I could see that look. He wasn't going to take the bait, John.
We'll wait and see.
You also have some other agenda items personally. Let's talk about those.
Some, and I'll just talk in vague terms about this without being too specific. I would really like to see this issue about how we treat women and women's health to completely separate the medical issues from the issues that are involved in the cultural wars, particularly with terminating pregnancies. We made a little progress year before last. But it really wasn't enough, and we need to separate that so women can go to their doctors. The doctors are able to treat them so they can have children, so they can have families, and they don't have to leave the state literally for care that saves their lives.
Are you hearing from doctors, Dr. Briggs, who are afraid to practice medicine in the state of Tennessee?
Absolutely, and there was actually a very well-known case in the Chancery Court in Nashville, and there were 6 women that had carried children that had anomalies on those children before they were born, of course, that were identified that were absolutely incompatible with survival. They had to leave the state. Their health was at jeopardy. Their future fertility, their future ability to have children was at jeopardy. And one thing that the state and the government should not do, they should not be telling women, we're going to have laws that keep you from having children and that keep you and your husband husband from having a family.
I noticed in looking at the list on your website for the General Assembly a bill regarding abortion and physicians. It doesn't sound like this one, but it talks about, and you've raised this issue before, about sort of the criminalization of the doctor performing the procedure and what have you. Is that what you're talking about, or is this different? Because it talks about things like if physician does not commit the offense of criminal abortion if under certain circumstances performs or attempts to perform abortion to address a lethal fetal anomaly or premature delivery of an unborn child.
This is that we haven't got the final bill, but this is what it is. And we're not talking about decriminalizing abortion in the way that
Elective abortion.
Elective abortion in the way we talk about it. Actually, we're going to define very clearly what abortion is, and we're not going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about medically necessary termination of pregnancies.
And I think that's important because, you know, we can argue that probably one of the least liberal states in the nation is Alabama, but yet they have one of the best laws on the book because they actually looked at what are the medically valid reasons that, you know, they are proven through the medical field of what rises to needing to be able to terminate a pregnancy, ectopic pregnancy, and there's 7 or 8 of them. So I think that's where Dr. Briggs is trying to go is, again, separating the politics from the medical side of things and making it more valid.
Which we've not been able to do in this state, unfortunately.
No, but I do want to make it absolutely clear, we're not going to decriminalize an illegal abortion.
We're going to take another break on Inside Tennessee. Back with more of our discussion and other issues facing Dr. Briggs and the rest of our lawmakers in Tennessee in the 2025 session right after this. Welcome back on Inside Tennessee. Our guest this morning, Dr. Richard Briggs, Eddie Smith, Don Bosch with us. John North, when he has notes, it's serious.
Well, I mean, I'm always interested in what bills a lawmaker wants to sort of see carried forward. And you've got a long list, Dr. Briggs, and they're all pretty significant. A couple about ethics and sort of how public officials, even maybe the governor, must conduct himself when doing things like travel and lobbyists. Can you talk a little bit about what you'd like to see there?
Yeah,
because we had an issue come up last year.
We had a couple of issues. One with our Commissioner of Education.
Yes, sir.
In the Department of Education. Also, a question came up with the governor, and it was because it was blurry and not real clear what was allowed and what was not allowed.
This is like travel reimbursement.
Yeah, this is travel reimbursement and who's doing the reimbursing and what the travel was about, and those were appealed to the State Ethics Commission. They have a ruling, and now what we're going to do is just codify what their ruling was, and that makes it a lot clearer. And I do want to say that both the governor and our Commissioner of Education, they went ahead, did not contest it any farther, and paid back the money that someone else had given them to go to these places to speak.
I saw one more I want to ask you, and then I'll be quiet. And I hadn't heard a lot of chatter about this, but if I understood it correctly, it was like the employer of a young person who suspected maybe the young person was a victim of sexual abuse.
Yes.
Can you talk a little about that? I haven't heard much about that one.
We haven't talked much about it, but what it was, there was a young person, and I hope I get this straight. There was a young person who worked, he was a minor, who worked at a business, and he was being sexually harassed. And the business did not let his parents know. Now,
creating a mandatory reporting situation for employers.
We're creating a mandatory reporting system, so if a minor that does work for a business, that they will be required to let the parents know. Now, they took appropriate steps, but
much like you would see in the school system.
Well, so is it different than with the school system? You have to report to an authority, but does your bill say that an employer only has to notify the parent?
Well, the main gist of the bill is notifying the parents. This is another bill that we're still working on.
And again, nothing he can do would actually trump the mandatory reporter law, because even in the school system, a teacher finds out, they may have to tell administration, but it's still the burden is on them under the mandatory to report it to either law enforcement or DCS. So based on what I've read of that would not change that. It would just put the extra burden on the business to notify the parents of a minor as well.
We talked about the state budget in large scope when we were talking about this special session and what can the state of Tennessee afford. And we're hearing reports that the margin is thin right now, the budget is tight. What is your message to people in our community about what we'll see out of session this year and what we may see cut?
I'm going to step back a few years. For instance, when Eddie Smith and I we started in the state legislature in 2015 was our first session. We've seen the budget almost we see the budget today 2.5 times larger. A lot of these surpluses that we're hearing about came during COVID because the federal money that came in during COVID was on a per capita basis. And because we did go back to work earlier than many states, it wasn't based on how long you were giving benefits. And if you were in California, we had money, maybe 8 or 9 months worth of money that we were able to keep, to stash away, so to speak, whereas California was spending it. But that money's gone now. And we just have to be really careful that we don't start spending like drunken sailors. And I am going to put a plug in for my party. We need to act like Republicans and be responsible here. We've always had these surpluses because in our budgets we've underestimated what we're going to spend, so we have surpluses at the end. The last 2 years, that's not been the case.
But Dr. Briggs, on that, and again, just explain, because there's 2 different types of surpluses. There's the recurring fund surplus, and then there's the one-time surplus. And what Tennessee's done a really good job at is using the one-time, the non-recurring surpluses for those one-time projects. I know a couple of years ago they put $1 billion, I think, into higher ed for both TCATs as well as, but that was non-recurring money, so it's not ongoing debt for the state. So there's 2 different types of surpluses when we're looking at the budget.
There is, but such as vouchers. That's going to be ongoing expenses. I mean, that was a $500 million fiscal note on it.
But that came out of the lottery funds, not out of the general fund.
A little bit of it, right?
Right, not all
of it.
But, okay, here's what the problem is with where that money came from. As you know, we have both the lottery fund and we have the sports wagering fund. The lottery fund money is all right there to be used for the Hope scholarships and it's
already 100% dedicated.
It's
correct?
already dedicated. What we do with the sports wagering money is that 15% went to the local governments, 5% went to a fund to treat people with gambling addictions, and 80% was then supposed to go into the lottery fund so we'd have plenty of money for scholarships. That money, that 80%, is not going to go into the lottery fund now. It's going to go into the school rebuilding and modernization fund, with the local school boards, and there will be holes.
But not for vouchers.
It won't be going directly for vouchers, but there will be holes. Now, see, this is where the voucher, the voucher bill gets bigger than just than private school vouchers. It also can affect our higher education.
All right. Well, we've got to leave it there with you, Dr. Briggs. We appreciate the discussion, and we'll hope to have you back this session. Thank you. And we'll be back on Inside Tennessee with a talk around right after this.
We are back. John North here with you, Inside Tennessee. The final block, we've got a little discussion we're going to do with Don and Eddie. Let's talk first, you guys, about Dr. Briggs, things he covered, and any observations you may have about what he had to say. Don?
Yeah, I found it very interesting. He kind of espoused my views about what the problems were with the vouchers. It is an entitlement program. It is going to people that are likely already in private schools. Right. It's got a threshold of 4 times over the lunch aid limit. That's $170,000 roughly for a family of 4. It is. It's not going to help those in need. There's not a mechanism really in place to govern it, and the money is still dubious about where it's coming from and how it's going to be funded. And we heard that from a conservative Republican senator. So it's not just us Democrats that are barking about it. Some other wizened heads on the other side are saying this too.
Eddie?
And again, I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to is, again, what he talked around the immigration. Is that provision truly unconstitutional? There's still a lot that's got to be discussed around that.
It is.
And I'm going to defer to my legal brain sitting to my right, which is odd since he's normally to my left. So it's really just looking around how do we make sure that we're doing things that are within the bounds of what the Constitution allows. And I think that's one of the things that everybody's got to remember is we are bound by the Constitution, whether it be federally or in the state. We've got to go.
Sometimes.
Well, Well,
Yeah.
I don't wonder. I know. I do wonder if some of them have read the Constitution, which they ought to do.
Doubtful.
But, as we look forward, coming up tomorrow night, we've got the governor's state of the state. So, those issues are now kind of, I'm just going to say, done with. They've got to work their way out over the next few years. But I'm looking at, how's the governor going to address some of the things that we see, especially around the child welfare issue. We continue to have problems with children staying in transition homes too long. The lack of funding in social services for children in foster care, in relative care, for our child advocacy centers across. We've had VOCA cuts on the federal level. We're now at 75% of all of the VOCA, which is the Victim of Crime Act funding, has been cut for the state because of just lost revenue. So there's some big things that I'm going to be looking to see how the governor addresses those in the state of the state.
Just want to back up 1 second in regards to immigration. The ACLU said immediately after that legislation passed, we will see you all in court. This is unconstitutional.
Yeah, and they're dead right. I fully expect at least that provision to be overturned. And I'm glad that Dr. Briggs is going to try to fix it legislatively before the courts have to do it. The thing I'm looking for from the governor really is something that's unique and special to me and my practice, but prison reform. Our state prison system is a mess right now. It is terrible. It is awful. It is not serving the needs of the prison population and the unincarcerated population. So we need to do something. We need to get away from the private prison model, which has just been an abysmal failure. I hope he addresses some part of that.
It's a big problem, but as Dr. Briggs suggested, Tennessee is kind of flat revenue-wise, and to fix the problems that we've got in this state would require a lot of scratch.
Yes, except when you look at the fact that, especially around some of the mental health issues around substance, we now have the opioid settlement dollars coming into the state. So that takes some burden because that money is there for the next 18 years. So that does start to relieve some of the pressure that may have been otherwise on the state budget, where they can actually take some of those funds and do something else because we have the settlement dollars coming in. So again, I'm going to be looking to see what is he going to do around mental health for both, the homeless population all the way down to the juveniles. What are we doing around some of the additional education reforms that still need to take place in the state?
And Eddie's got a good situation where they're using a carrot. The stick is going to come on the prison side from the federal government, and we're going to be under some federal mandates that are going to be very expensive given the poor state of our prisons.
Eddie, you talking about the issues you just mentioned reminds me that about 2 years ago, I think it's legitimate to say DCS was crying out that they had some very serious problems. Do you feel since then that the legislature, in what it did and what the governor pushed for, has been adequate to meet the needs of DCS so that they can go and investigate the needs and the questions that arise from children in need?
And we could do a 30-minute segment on this because it starts at the federal level. You go back to 2018, 2019, the federal government passed the Families First Prevention Services Act. That actually reduced residential capacity across the whole country. When you reduce residential capacity, you by nature force them into foster homes. Those kids who needed to be in residential are now blowing out homes, so we're losing foster homes, which is putting the pressure on DCS. So everybody wants to blame DCS, but it really kind of started way up when we just completely reformed child welfare overnight without it ever going through any committee in Washington. Now, what they've done has been kind of the emergency. Here's what we've got to do right now. But across the child welfare space, I mean, from beginning to end, there needs to be more funding. When you look at all child advocacy centers, they've remained flat funded for 26 years. When you go up into transitional homes, we don't have enough capacity. So there's still a lot of things in that space we've got to do as a state.
Don, any closing thought?
No, it's a big problem. We need to address it, and we need to address it now, not later.
Well, it's only February, and we've got plenty of other opportunities, other Sundays, where we will be discussing with you what's going on with the state legislature, lots more guests. We appreciate you watching Inside Tennessee. We'll be back next Sunday.